Well, thank you, and good evening and welcome everybody to the first community forum for the Millis Middle High School MSBA project. I'm Bob Mulaney, Superintendent of Schools here in Millis, and tonight you'll hear from some important people involved with this project. Just to give you a little background, before we move into the program, the current Millis High School was built in 1960 with an addition, completed in 1966. There was a renovation in 1999, but no new space was added at that time. The building currently has a number of infrastructure and space inadequacies that need to be addressed. In June of 2021, Millis Public Schools in the town of Millis submitted a statement of interest in participating in the Massachusetts School Building Authority program, that's the MSBA. The MSBA works with cities and towns to help fund needed school building projects. In March of 2022, the MSBA board voted to include Millis Middle High School in the program. There were 58 applications submitted in 2021, and Millis was one of 17 applications accepted. The MSBA board described these 17 projects as the most needy and urgent of the 58 applications submitted. Tonight's meeting will give you more information on the MSBA program, our school building committee, our owner's project manager, OPM Vertex, and selected designer, Tape Architects. For tonight's program, viewers will be able to ask questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer these questions as best we can as we are still in the very early stages of this process. So as you're viewing, if you see something, you have a question on it, just put it in the Q&A and we'll be moderating that and we'll get to those questions. This forum is also being recorded and the link will be made available on our school building project webpage, and that's www.millisschoolproject.com. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to the school building committee chair, Rich Nichols, who will talk more about the process. So you can take it away, Rich.
All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks, Bob, for that opening statement and kind of bringing us up to speed on the need that the town has for the school. On the forum agenda, we're going to have welcome and introductions where we'll introduce the team, why this project, why now, which was kind of alluded to at the beginning, where we've got some infrastructure issues that are some immediate, some that are going to be problematic, and some are like the sort of Damocles hanging over our heads. We'll also walk through the MSBA process and future reimbursement. So the Massachusetts School Building Committee will give the town money to help offset the cost of the building process. And so we'll walk through that. We'll walk through the timeline and milestones. This process is very prescriptive by the MSBA, and we have to follow their timeline in order to get the funding that we want from the state. Also, we'll go through the existing conditions analysis. They went through the building and did some work. We have a design and visioning process ahead where the school meets with the designers, and also there's folks from the public that can join in to that, and they can also have input. And then we'll have a question and answer period. And okay, great. So with the project team, we have the voting members that's on the school building committee. So I'm the chairman. I have extensive building experience. I worked on the partway through on the Clyde Brown School. We have Diane Germain, who's the vice chair. Diane has been on the permanent building committee for many years. She went through the full Clyde Brown project, and her experience is extremely valuable. She's a good right-hand person to have on the team. We have from the school, Mark Conroy and Denise Gibbons. They're representing the town. We have John Larkin, Jim McCaffrey, and Jeremy Stull. Jim McCaffrey was a select board member for many years, and we all are familiar with him. John Larkin has been on the permanent building committee, and Jeremy Stull has experience on going through school projects on other towns. So he's a definite asset. Non-voting members would be the two principals of the schools, which would be Anna Hurley and Mark Udwicki. And sorry if I screwed your name up, Mark. We have the building manager or facilities manager, John Engler, Terry Wigan, who is in charge of the business affairs of the school, Mike Kaczynski, who is the town manager, and Bob Mullaney, who spoke first, is the superintendent of schools. With the OPM, that is, they're basically our owner's project manager. They work on behalf of the town. So we hired Vertex. We worked with them previously on the Clyde Brown School. I have a very high threshold of wanting good people to work with, and I can tell you right now that I was impressed by Jeff and Vertex the last go round, and I've just met Mike a little while ago, and he has stepped up to that high bar also. And then on the architectural side, we interviewed a bunch of different architects. We went back to Taipei. They did the Clyde Brown School. Their design, I think, fit well with the town, and they were good to work with. And I think all in all, we had an excellent product that it turned out through a very difficult, construction process. It was a lot of stuff going on, and I think they did a good job on catching all the details and making sure we got our money's worth out of that. So with that, I'll turn that over to the next person, who would be Denise Gibbons.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. So following on what Superintendent Mullaney shared, we just wanted to level set a bit to give folks a brief history. If this is your first time hearing about the project, or if it's been a while since you've gotten yourself up to speed on where we are right now, wanted to give you a little bit of background on how we came about on the project side of things. So as a district and as a school committee and as an administrative team, the district reviews the needs of the facility on an annual basis. At different intervals, we perform facility assessments with outside firms to do a full review of the facility itself, understand what large ticket items that we have, and be able to future plan for what those are. So we had two of those within the last 10 years. 10 years ago, we did one 2014, and then just recently did one 4 years back in 2020. Coming out of the 2020 review, there were some very large items that we put onto the capital plan and have been providing visibility to the town as to what the upcoming and known costs are for the facility. So in the process of looking for ways to help fund those, the district submitted the statement of interest as Principal Mullaney had shared in 2021. That's the process that the state goes through to identify which districts are in need and could be invited into their program. So we were fortunate enough to be admitted on our first submission, which is rather rare for folks that were around with Clyde Brown. It took us 5 years to get invited in for the Clyde Brown School. So it was fortunate for us that we were invited in after our first submission. And we are grateful that in November of 2022, the town approved $1.3 million to fund this feasibility study, which is the phase that we're in right now and what the Vertex and Taipei teams will talk to us about. So since March of 23, the MSBA, after the town approved the funding, the MSBA formally invited us into the process. And since that time, we've been going through the very prescriptive process. You'll hear that word quite a bit, I'm sure, tonight, from the MSBA, which has been to select the building committee and select the owner's project manager and select the design firm. And now we are deep at the very beginning of the marathon of the project, which is identifying the possibilities for design, looking at various options, which the experts will talk to you about in a second and how that works. But that's just a very brief summary of how we got to the point where we are at today. I'll turn it back to Rich to talk about why we're choosing to take a look at this now.
Thank you.
Rich, I'm sorry to interrupt for
Go
just
ahead.
1 second. I just want to make sure people know that as we go along, if you have questions, feel free to preload them into the Q&A as we go along, and then at the end we will address them. So just wanted to make sure everybody was clear on that. Sorry,
Yep.
Go ahead, Rich.
No, great. Thanks, Mike. No problem. So next slide, if you could.
Yep.
All right. So why this project? Why now? So the middle high school facility needs significant repair. A lot of major systems are past their useful life. One of the key things right now is that the roof is leaking. They did a survey of it in 2020. I'd seen some stuff floating around some of the social media on, another roof. Roofs last 30 years. This roof has been in since 1993 or whenever they did it. So it's due to be replaced. This isn't us making stuff up. And we actually had a study where they actually went through, did samples all around. There's definite issues with that. HVAC also is an issue where they have classrooms that are overheating, and there's and when they went through the COVID issues, they realized that there were also ventilation issues within the school. One other issue is that the main service in the school was original to the original build, and they don't make parts for it anymore. If we ever have an issue with that electrical service, it not guaranteed it's going to happen, but something like that could happen. We have no replacement for it, so that's something that definitely would need to be upgraded. The security obviously has been it was from original in the 60s when we didn't have to worry about security, and the technology for the school is not up to what the standards are that we should have nowadays. They've upgraded what they could, but it's not what people are using now, at business or at home. The spaces are undersized. The project also will support facility and educational plan improvements. And Bob had said earlier, trying to bring up the school to a 21st century education. We need to bring the project, the school program itself up in making the facility better. That will help. Also, which is another key factor, the MSBA will provide significant financial contribution. So we will need to do some work on, let's start off with the roof. If we have the MSBA contributing to that, that obviously will make it better for the town. Funding will be required with or without an MSBA project. So, it's our thought that, and we hope that everyone else has thought that partnering with the MSBA for this renovation project will save the town some money, and that's our key.
Thanks, Rich. Jeff D'Amico with Vertex. We're your owner's project manager. So myself and Mike are going to talk about the MSBA and is an introductory to the town. And so I'll first talk about the process, some of the alphabet soup acronyms that you're going to hear over the course. And then I'll talk about the bumper rails that are involved in the MSBA reimbursement process, because dollars and cents is obviously important to every town. But today we're just going to talk about the program itself until we have real numbers. I can't translate that to you as to what that means to the tax base down the road, but that will come at a later date in the project. But to kick it off here, I want to talk about the three major submissions. So the MSBA process has three major submissions. The first one is known as the Preliminary Design Program, PDP, and that's really big picture. So you want to understand the ED program, We work with the users, we work with the superintendent, the principals, we bring in an ed programming visioner to help draw out how you deliver the program in Millis today and how you'll deliver that tomorrow. Charlie will talk more about that in the coming slides, so I won't dwell on it too much, but also the first step is the space summary template, what you have today and what you need to satisfy the program and enrollment for your school. Existing conditions assessment, and then site developments and a preliminary determination of alternatives. And so that's what's going to happen over the first few months of the project. And then the building committee is looking to put that first submission in April to the MSBA. From there, we'll move over to the preferred schematic report, which is really the meat of the project, where you start to grind through the options, do a deeper dive on the various options that are out there, do a refinement of the educational program, and do a final evaluation of alternatives. It's the first time you'll start to see cost on the overall project. And ultimately, this all comes to the recommended solution that the building committee will bring forward that they'd like to submit to the MSBA. And Mike will talk about the timeline of that in a moment. Once we get to that point, you'll have locked in the option that you want to move forward. And from there, we get more to the technical side of things in the schematic design phase. At the end of schematic design, that represents approximately 30% of the overall project. You'll really dial in the floor plans and massing of the building. You'll have a better understanding of the traffic assessment, environmental impacts, geotechnical code and sustainability impacts of the project, and then project delivery method, which is whether you go with a general contractor or a construction manager approach to the project. Lastly, we would finalize the total project budget and cost estimates. And at that point, we would know the maximum reimbursement the town would be receiving. Right now, that's targeted for the end of this calendar year. Next, I'm going to talk about the MSBA reimbursement process. Now, this is complicated in the sense that there's many layers to this onion. The MSBA will set aside a reimbursement, but inside that reimbursement program, there's many types of ineligible items, caps, and things that are outside of their guidelines. So first off is the categorically ineligible, items that are not necessarily part of the program or pertinent to delivering education. And so I'll go into that in a second on the next slide. Then we'll get into the MSBA caps, which is where they limit the overall caps within a program and the overall cap of the project cost in general. And then there's elements where it exceeds the guidelines. And I'll give you some examples of that in a second. Next slide. So categorically ineligible. If you would acquire additional land, any legal fees, any off-site improvements, stadiums and turf fields, utility back charges, modular classrooms, whether permanent or swing space, local permitting fees, bond borrowing costs, site remediation, asbestos containing floor tiles, and then an auditorium for a middle school. Auditoriums are allowed at a high school program. And then lastly, district administrative offices. So that one is applicable to your particular project should we affect that part of the program as part of the future solution of the project. Next slide. So the caps, in addition to things that are categorically ineligible, the MSBA has a whole host of caps, and these things do increase over time. All the items in red here have increased since you last went through the program with the Clyde Brown School project. First off, they cap soft costs. And so soft cost is the elements of the project outside of the construction cost of the program. They cap that at 20% overall. Within that 20%, they cap the OPMs free at 3.5% of the construction cost and the architect at 10%. That used to be a cap at 3.5 and 10 of the total estimated construction cost. But the MSBA a few years ago lowered that portion back down to align with the piece of the dollars that they would reimburse for the actual construction dollars themselves, which currently is $555. That was just increased in October of this past fall. So the good news is that you guys are starting out in the process with higher reimbursement than the projects that came only a few short months ago. So now the MSBA has not only increased the overall building cost to $555, they've increased the site cost. At the time you did Clyde Brown, that was 8% of the total cost. Now it's up to 10%. The time you did Clyde Brown, the dollars for the building costs were at $275, and currently we're at $555. The furniture and technology has not changed in the entirety of the MSBA's program in 15 years. That's always capped out at $1,200 per student for FF&E and $1,200 per student for technology based on your enrollment. And then change orders exceeding 1% have not changed as well. That has stayed constant in the 15 years of the program. But I do want to note that the most important thing here to realize is that the cost of the project back at Clyde Brown has been escalated a lot. Like in the industry in general, cost of construction has dramatically increased. And so the MSBA does not keep pace with that. There was a much bigger widened margin that was occurring over the last few years. And with those votes in October of this past fall, they really tried to close that gap. But the current cost that we're seeing for, new school buildings that are in the 700 to 800 range certainly don't keep pace with the 555 that the MSBA has put out there as an overall program. Next slide. But what does that mean to you specifically? So the town of Millis has a socioeconomic factor that's assigned to you of 53.53%. And so that's your baseline reimbursement. The MSBA then allows incentive points. The energy rebate used to be 2%. And last year they increased that to 3 or 4. There's an option to go for a fourth point. So it's 3 plus 1 is how it's validated. And that's if you're pursuing high level of sustainability called passive house. And so that's something the building committee will discuss and debate as we go through the process and see what that means in real terms as it relates to the future solution that the building committee comes up with. They also evaluate the town and how you maintain your existing buildings, and they'll give you a rating of 0 to 2%. Lastly, should the town choose an addition or renovation option, they'll give you additional percentage points for that, ranging from 0 to 5%, depending on the percentage of the building that you're able to retain and the percentage that becomes an addition. Some towns also are eligible to get the incentive point for an overlay district, but that's not applicable at this time in this town. Ultimately, once you get through the process and you understand which incentive points we can add, that'll layer into a final reimbursement rate. But in red here at the bottom, I do want to note there's a different effective reimbursement rate. The MSBA process is not straight math. We covered this a lot with Clyde Brown, and it's best to educate the public once we know the final estimate number so we can put a real number and a range to what that effective reimbursement rate is. And that'll come through in future public forums we present. I'm going to turn it over to Mike to talk about the next steps in the overall process.
So this kind of gives a little, graphic representation of the process that Jeff sort of laid out, the really 3-part process of the feasibility and schematic phase for the MSBA. Starting on the left here in orange being the preliminary design plan. Basically, we're at that first star down at the bottom where the first community forum. So we're really just getting kicked off here and excited to get this project started with the public. And we have, as you can see along the bottom, a series of community forums planned out throughout this process to be able to engage the public and gather feedback. The next one will come during that preferred schematic report section, but it'll be after we submit our PDP, and you'll hear that alphabet soup a lot. And so that'll kick off in April. We expect to have in late April another community forum to engage you all, and then as well a couple of more during that phase. Ultimately, once the town selects a preferred option, that gets submitted to the MSBA during that preferred schematic report, and then we wait for the board approval. Oftentimes we will start schematic design in anticipation of that approval. As you can see, there's a bit of an overlap in August. And as we get into schematic design, what we're really doing is drilling down into the preferred option, which then has the amount of due diligence that we need to resubmit to the MSBA late this year at the end of December. And then really finalizing cost numbers, all in preparation for a board approval in February of next year. So just about a year from now. And then basically a couple of month process that we've laid out for proceeding to town meeting next year, in the spring of next year. Putting together road shows, as we call them, where we present the project, answer questions, and really make sure the public has what they need to be able to vote on the project come town meeting. And then subsequent to that, if it's approved at town meeting, and then we will move into the next phase of the project, which is far more extensive, but we won't get into this evening. So how are we going to evaluate all of these options that are being generated? We have a way of trying to boil it down really into a making matrix. This is something that we do on our projects where we basically outline our design options along the top. These will include the code minimum upgrade, the addition and reno options that TAPE will develop, as well as we need to, whether we're considering it or not, we still need to provide a brand new school option. So those get laid out across the top, and then along the vertical on the left side, we start to develop criteria in discussions with the town. You know, we have some things that are standard throughout all schools, K to 12 schools. Things like, you know, how does the educational program work with the option? You know, how is it in terms of cost comparatively? Schedule wise, is one option longer schedule, et cetera? You know, how is it for permitting? Will it require, you know, a lengthy permitting process, or would it be simple permitting? So all of those things are criteria, and we factor in, and those end up coming back to what we like to call our little stoplight approach here, which makes it graphically readable. Now, there's obviously text that's below that, but what it starts to do is identify the options that are more favorable, as obviously the level of green being, you know, that criteria that's very advantageous for that option. And so as we start to look at the options from left to right, ones that have more red, you know, start to fall to the wayside. We start to see, you know, where the benefits lie for each of the options. And that's just a way for us to, in discussion with the town, really start to boil down the options to something that the town can get behind. I'm going to turn it over to Charlie, who's the principal from TAPE. We'll talk through a little bit about the architectural process. Charlie?
Thank you, Mike. I'm delighted to be here. TAPE is delighted to be here. We're very pleased to be working again with Millis and are grateful for the opportunity. And excited to do this. It's a challenging project, as anyone who's familiar with the site, which I'm sure everyone on this call is. We have a tight site. We have a building that you know needs attention, but those are the most engaging and interesting projects. So, as Denise said, you're going to hear the word prescriptive. This process is prescriptive. I think by now everybody probably has a headache, so forgive us. And I will try to whisk through the rest of this, which is really sort of from the architect's view. But really from the architect's view, and I think Jeff mentioned this, but we really see it kind of as a three-legged stool. The existing conditions analysis for the PDP, which is that for this first phase, is really mission critical. The educational plan and space template is really, really critical, and Jeff mentioned those as well. And then, of course, the preliminary concepts, which you really haven't, we're just starting now, will become very important, because those are the kind of building blocks that allow the committee to kind of go through the various options and ultimately, in the next phase, select the right option. So from the existing conditions analysis perspective, we have done field work already. For anybody who's around the site, you could possibly have seen it. There's been a survey crew out doing a site survey for quite a while. We did in preliminary geotechnical investigation, which means taking test boring, seeing what the soils are like under the building and next to the building. There's a hazardous materials investigation that's underway that simply samples the air and samples some building materials to see if there's anything that would have to be abated as part of a future project. And from that, we can get a cost estimate. There's already been traffic counts taken for what will, in this first phase, be an existing traffic condition report, and ultimately will evolve into a proposed traffic condition report. And then, of course, has already been mentioned, and Rich talked a lot about this. Your systems, many are in need of attention. So our engineers, all of our consulting engineers have been through the building. They will prepare existing conditions reports, and then as will our structural engineer. And then, of course, code compliance. So any project you consider would have to be code compliant. So that means life safety codes. That means accessibility codes. We need a building that is universally accessible. And then site analysis is important. And that means looking at landscape design. It looks at civil. It's going to look at parking and roadways. And then the final piece of this, of course, is the building's areas relative to the MSBA max and minimum requirements. And as has been mentioned, they have a specific template that they expect us to live with in order to receive funding around the size of spaces. So we can't ask the MSBA to support a project that doesn't generally meet their template. And the image on the right just shows you an early analysis of, well, what is under the template and what's over the template and what's equal to the template. And you see a lot of red there. And that means that a lot of our classrooms are not large enough. And the overall building size does not meet the MSBA's space template for a building with this student population. So as we move along to the next slide, I hope, we will also look at site, as has been previously mentioned. So we have constraints with the site. There are going to be regulatory issues. There's going to be, which include zoning, planning, conservation. We need to consider, as I mentioned, service and parking. Traffic flow is obviously mission critical. And of course, outdoor learning is important. And most schools really want to create spaces and places for students to learn outdoors. So we'll be looking at that as well. So the site will be a critical component of this early analysis. But the other next slide, please. The next topic is really the educational plan and space template. So what will come out of this PDP, acronym number 1, is a educational plan that is prepared actually by the district. And this is really what the MSBA sees as the sort of touchstone, the North Star of the educational planning. And they're very, very focused on it. So that's a lot of work by the educators in your district, but it is quite comprehensive. And part of what informs that, I mean, it's already well underway, but part of what informs that, and was mentioned by Rich, is kind of having visioning sessions, which are led by David Stephen for us from New Vista Design, who's an educational planner, and he gathers together students, educators, members of the community, and really talks through what the goals and aspirations are for the building. And that actually ultimately kind of translates into bricks and mortar. So that process is underway. Go ahead. That process is underway. It really is about getting the right people in the room, talking about what the right educational practices and principles are, and then really talking about design patterns. How does this translate to a building? What do you want, and how does that translate into a building? And then we talk about adjacencies, what needs to be next to what shouldn't be next to what. And then the final piece of it is really talking points. How do you communicate this out so people understand what the goals are and why we've reached the conclusions we've reached? So it's a comprehensive process. Next slide. And it will really inform the process moving forward. And so David has already started. We've already had one session. I won't go into it in detail, but you can see that he's asking kind of questions. What do you value most? What do you really want to see have happen in your school? And obviously, student-centered learning is number 1. That's pretty encouraging. Students are first, as they should be. But, there's a whole host of topics, and sometimes one rises higher than another one. And that's informative because every district is different, every district, how they approach things. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see a picture of that initial session. And there's a couple more coming. And some of the priorities that came out of this for educational kind of educational thinking were around excellence, of course, and having a welcoming, inclusive, warm, inviting, and safe kind of school environment, which is really important. Also, collaborative learning, which has really become so much more mission critical for educators in the last 10 to 20 years. Bringing in real world sort of examples, mentoring, health and wellness. And then, of course, as most schools are focused on extracurricular activities. And the project will, of course, have ubiquitous technology, because that has also just become a complete requirement of any educational environment in this day and age. So those are kind of, but you know, the initial kind of three really, or number four, really give you a flavor of sort of the values that your district, your educators, your community bring to planning a school, which is really encouraging. And it's really about a welcome and inclusive place with joy and creativity. So the next slide shows you a little bit of community feedback, and what priorities might be for the community. Let's go to the next slide, Mike.
Yeah.
And so from a community perspective, use and access. So a lot of high schools particularly have, you know, areas that can be accessed by the community for community use. There's an interest in that. Volunteer opportunities within the school, which may not translate into bricks and mortar, but it's come out as an issue. Athletic facilities, so we certainly already having conversations about the athletic facilities within the building. Community partnerships, senior programming opportunities. So some of those really are about how do you make a place that will accommodate these kind of programs. And so that's something that we'll be looking at as we move forward. Slide. So how does this all translate into a building? Well, the space template I already mentioned, and that graphic up there in the corner is one very small portion of this very detailed and extensive space template that we will complete. And it really asks, two fundamental things. What do you have now? And what do you, well, three things. What do you have now? What are you proposing? And is it in compliance with MSBA baseline requirements? One comment when we were reviewing these slides is, boy, that graphic is small, and it was made small intentionally because we're not going to get into it tonight, but it is a lengthy full page spreadsheet. But again, the visioning really informs the district's educational plan, which is really about instruction and ultimately about how the building is organized and how it serves the students and what the district really prioritizes for spaces. We will do the space template. And then, of course, the building design will be informed by all of this. And so it does, in fact, follow on, and it does drive the building ultimately, where things are located, how big or small they are, what their adjacencies are, how you want them to feel. Are they full of light? Are they welcoming? These kind of topics. So that's all going to come out of this design kind of process. It will not all come out right away. This doesn't happen magically overnight. This is a lengthy sort of process to get to the end line, but it's what we are embarking on. As Denise said, the beginning of a long journey. So next slide. So what are we going to do next? So preliminary concepts, the next step. So we're just starting on this. And for the PDP, which is this first phase, they are very, very conceptual ideas. They are basically taking little sugar cubes and plunking them down on the site and saying, well, we could do this. Well, we could do that. The MSBA has, as has already been mentioned, you must study a renovation, which is a building without doing any additions, not making any changes other than upgrading systems and making it code compliant. So that's really saying, well, what if you did nothing other than leave your building alone and fix it up? And you can do that, but of course, then you're not in compliance with the MSBA's space template. So then the question becomes, well, how interested is the MSBA in supporting a building that is a straight renovation? But we do the study anyway. And then we have that baseline understanding. We have to look at a renovation addition. There's a general inclination to look hard at that option for this particular project. And we will come up with a host of options. And the boxes on the right here are from the Clyde Brown project, which we were involved in, as Rich mentioned. And you know, these options are really no more detailed at this stage than something like this. There are boxes on the site that say, hey, we could put something over here. Hey, we could put something over there. They will become more detailed when we advance them into the next phase and really have to nail down what we're going to pick. But This is the start. This is the beginning. It's what we start thinking about. And of course, replacement. So some people may be alarmed at the idea of having to do a replacement project. We are not required to do a replacement project. We are required to study a replacement project, and that's what we will do. And then we will be looking at, again, the site approach, these diagrams and concept budget ranges. We don't really nail down a number at this stage at all. What we often do is put a sort of a range in and say, and the ranges are quite wide, and sort of say, well, this one, what we're really looking for at this stage is an order of magnitude difference. So if one of them is, really big, it's going to cost more. If one of them is really small, it's going to cost less. It doesn't really matter what the number is. It matters that one is more than the other. And that is part of the matrix that Jeff shared with you, or Mike shared with you about what are the benefits and does the cost drive a decision or not? And that's really what we're trying to get to. So that's the next step. That's what we're embarking on. And I think that's my last slide. And I think that, we're getting into it now. We're rolling up our sleeves. It's getting exciting, and we're looking forward to continuing the process.
Thanks, Charlie. So we're going to roll into some question and answers. Again, if you could put them in the chat. We've got 2 in there so far, but feel free to queue them up. We'll want to make sure we're touching on people's concerns. I know it's still early in the process, so a lot of people don't even know what their questions are yet until we start to see more information out there. So,
And Mike, one thing,
go ahead,
sorry
Rich.
if I can interrupt. I think Bob had a closing statement.
Yep.
It's what it said in the. Bob.
I didn't know if you wanted to
Yeah,
do
I
that.
think we're
after
gonna do the
Q&A or-
questions first.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think we're doing the questions first.
So first question, and I will pose to Bob and Rich, is regarding the fields. And the question is, can the existing football, soccer field and track be redone as long as the field is not upgraded to AstroTurf, maybe just restored after installation of new stormwater upgrade that might be required?
Well, I can start off on that, Bob, if that's okay. Typically the MSBA won't reimburse fields. That's not in their scope. So if we have to relocate the school due to the way it lays out, then I think that then they might have something to do with that, which I'd have to go back to Jeff on. But generally, the MSBA does not cover schools, and for our purposes,
Fields.
and Bob can speak to this after we're done. Our goal on this project is to maintain. We're going to try to manage costs. So, we're keeping our eye on the purse. So that's one thing. Now, Bob wanted to bring up a point also, which he brought up earlier, which you can go ahead, Bob.
Want to
Well, yeah.
clarify, go ahead, Bob, and I can clarify the cost too.
Yeah, I mean, in doing a project like this, I think it does behoove us to look at the fields and see what might be possible and what might be palatable to the community. Our fields get a lot of use. And, we have 120 odd students doing spring track, and we don't have a track. So, it's definitely something we want to look at, and how far we go with that at this point, we don't know. But Jeff, I think you can speak to the MSBA's
Sure.
contribution.
Yeah, so it's not so much that the MSBA doesn't participate in fields. They cap their site cost at 10% of the building cost. So they will pay for non-turf fields or site improvements should it be below 10%. But the reality is, in the case if you were building a new building, by the time you've excavated for the foundations and built the parking lot, you've already exceeded 10%, right? And if it's a limited renovation, it changes the metrics a little. But the reality is, most projects go through the MSBA pipeline, hit that cap on the site early. And so therefore, any work around the fields would be on the town side of the coin. But it's an allowable element to move forward, just be fully funded from the town side.
Yeah, I think to that point, I'd just add that we are going to look at that as part of the examination. But it's about finding that balance and what would the town support financially. And that would be a lower priority than the educational goals of this project right now. So, that's going to be part of the community forums, and we get to see how much support there is, and how much people might be willing to see their taxes go up in order to fund that. But ultimately, we don't want to put the educational goals of the project at risk by putting forth too big a project, unless there's clear support from the town for it. All right, next question. I'm actually going to pose this to Jeff, since he was part of the Clyde Brown project and knows this site inside and out. There's a question regarding existing conditions. A note that says the overall site plan appears to show areas of quote unquote town park that received parkland status during the recent Clyde Brown school project. If the high school project wanted to use that land for new building, wouldn't the town need to replace existing parkland at a 1.5 replacement rate plus state legislature votes?
Yep,
You wanna
so
take that?
excellent question. And those of you that were around for Clyde Brown, there was a lengthy process to go through the state legislature in order to swap land, and then it had to be replicated. At that time, there was a land swap that occurred at the front of the site to free up the parcel for where the Clyde Brown is today. And there was land traded at the back of the middle high school, which is off Spring Street, which is the lower right side of the green image that was presented earlier tonight. The parkland status has allowable uses, and so fields, basketball courts, tennis courts, roadways, those are all allowable uses in that zone. Should a building be placed in the parkland, that would require going back through Article 97 land swap. Now, at the time the town went forward with Article 97 for the Clyde Brown, they ensured that we had enough space to build a replacement middle high school should it be needed. And that would be in the footprint of either the track, the baseball field, or the parking lots around it. So there is plenty of space to build a new building adjacent to the existing building without impeding on the parkland space. And there are allowable uses such as replication of those fields that can go in the parkland locations. So there is an ability to replace the building without having to go through Article 97.
Thanks, Jeff. Next is a comment, but I think it's worth sharing. It says, can the team please reconcile the information, detail, thoroughness, document sequencing, searchable labeling, and organization between the project website and the school district website, even if one feeds into the other? Separating this from Clyde Brown legacy pages would be helpful for online searching website and social pages. Thank you. So we will look into that, and we're just getting started with the project website for this, so we'll coordinate that with the town moving forward. Then there's a follow-up question. Where is the MSBA certified enrollment data? Is it posted? Can someone review that process to finalize this data? Does the school committee agree with that outcome? How do these numbers diverge from state DOE enrollment data? We do have a certified enrollment. If it's not posted to the website, we will make sure that that is. But in terms of school committee response to the outcome of that negotiation, yes, I would defer to Denise on that one.
Yeah, so as part of the project, the district, along with the MSBA, went through multiple discussions related to enrollment numbers, and we were actually able to get a little bit of an increase based on projected growth and building in the town, both recent and permitted. So they brought their number up a little bit, but we are currently in agreement with what the enrollment projection numbers are that we have as part of the project. Again, after going through that rather extensive process along with town side, working with the town administrator, again, looking at growth through building and through approved permitting, and then projecting that onto the enrollment numbers. So the exact same process that we went through as part of determining what the enrollment was for the Clyde Brown. As with Clyde Brown, we thought the number was a little bit low. We think we have been as aggressive as possible to try to get the best number and best outcome that we possibly can. So we are satisfied with the number that we have right now based on that process.
You want to give the number, Denise, too? It's 645 students.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Denise. Final question I have posted in the chat right now is, how can community residents volunteer to lead and serve on subject subcommittees?
Rich,
I guess.
yeah.
What's that, Jeff?
No, I was gonna say, Rich, you want to take that one first?
I was gonna say, Rich, that's probably a question for you.
Sorry. We have the permanent building committee and the school building committee. Right now, that's an established committee. Our meetings are eventually we're gonna have open meetings where we'll actually be meeting in person. Our other meetings are via Zoom. Those are also open to the public. So, you know, I'm sure we could have it where people can weigh in, you know, during the meetings. We will have to run our meetings. However, we will take comments, you know, at the end or during, depending on how it all works out. So, you know, we want the process to be open. This isn't a, you know, behind closed doors, cigar smoke filled room. You know, we want everyone to be comfortable with the process. So.
And certainly there'll be an opportunity if people really support the project to independently sort of, you know, build support behind it prior to town meeting. Okay, next question. I recommend that there be a discussion with the DPW director, actually it's a statement, excuse me. I recommend there be a discussion with the DPW director regarding sufficient storage for field equipment and other implements. Yep, I'll just say that we will be certainly coordinating the whole project with the DPW. If that and the fields become part of that discussion will certainly occur. But there will be plenty of other discussions with the DPW and other town constituencies, whether it be finance committee, whether it be you know, police and fire obviously are going to be a big part of our design process to make sure this is a safe site for town's kids. So absolutely that will occur.
Yeah, and that already has to some extent with the facility director for the school. He's made that suggestion to date already. So we'll certainly follow up with Jim McKay and others as necessary.
Okay, there's nothing left in the chat. So if anybody has a final question or two, we'll give you a minute just to sort of upload that. But at this point, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. I did put up on the screen per request, just our stay informed links. The project website we're still building out. There's not a ton of information, but it will be as we build it all up. We have a project email that goes through both the administration and comes to Vertex, so we can make sure questions are being answered as promptly as possible. Please bear with us. We don't always have the answer immediately. So we will respond to those as they come in. And then stay informed about school building committee meetings, including one next Wednesday. We have another, our next school building committee. So those are all posted accordingly through the town postings, both digitally and I believe at town hall. So I am not seeing any other questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob, who had, oh, sorry, just popped in just under the wire. So the question is, the Tri-County project school leaders eschewed public input and said as much to our residents via a select board meeting on record. It was shocking. Community engagement best practices can easily be followed. Please add a public Q&A section to the project website. Thank you. Okay, Bob, you had a closing statement?
We do have a frequently asked questions tab on the website. We are gonna, as Mike noted too, we just launched the website last month. And so as the project progresses, we're going to fill that out more robustly as more information becomes available. And that includes FAQs. As you see on here, there's an email on the screen in front of you, but if you go to the website, there's also a place to follow along. You could subscribe to the project in case we do push out information about upcoming forums or other presentations. And there's an ability to submit questions as well to contact us. And so, stay informed and stay connected. Back to you, Bob.
I'd just like to thank Mike and Jeff and Charlie from Vertex and Tape for all their expertise in helping guide us through the process. I'd like to thank the permanent and the school building committee for all the work they've already done and all the work that lies ahead of them. Very excited about this project. I think it's an important project for our students and our community. And I've been very pleased with the public's interest in the project and willingness to get involved. As Jeff mentioned and Charlie mentioned, we had our first educational visioning session earlier this month, and we had great turnout, great input from the public. So thank you all for attending tonight. It is an indication of the community's interest in what's happening in town, and we believe the school is a very important part of that. So thank you all. There will be more forums like this. There will be more opportunities for input, and we look forward to you joining us along the journey of this process. So thank you all very much. And usually after these meetings, you say have a safe ride home, but you're already home. So that's a good thing.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.